Good afternoon, everyone. It's Thursday, April 16th, and we're continuing in our study looking at some different Psalms. We're going to come today to Psalm 13. Now, I'm going to read the Psalm for us. If you have your Bibles, if you want to read along with me, you can. But we'll be in Psalm 13. We're going to read the whole Psalm together, and we're just going to take a moment to look at it. So Psalm 13, starting in verse 1. To the choir master, Psalm of David. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord, my God. Lift up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. As we come to this text, as we look at it today, the first thing we kind of need to consider is, have you ever thought about questioning or asking questions of God? I think this is something we tend to refrain from doing. We hesitate in doing. We are resistant in questioning God because we feel like in questioning God, really, who are we to question? Who are we to question God and his sovereignty, this creator of the universe? Wouldn't that make us the most arrogant of people to come and question God? So we simply say, well, God is sovereign. That's that. But what we see in our text today is that we are actually instructed that there is a way we can properly approach God and question. How long is the question that we begin with in Psalm 13? How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? It's such a different way than I think we're used to approaching God. Would it ever come into your mind to sit down and start praying and saying, how long will it feel like you've abandoned me? My enemies are all around me and I'm overwhelmed and it doesn't feel like you're here. How long till it feels like you're here? We've lost the ability to cry out to God, and I think it's left us very deficient in our faith because we don't know how to come before him in our anguish. And so what we end up doing is we just don't come before him unless we're feeling good. Unless things are well and we can say, oh, come and we praise you, God, for all the many blessings. But it is good and it's right and it's proper to turn to him, as we see in this psalm, and cry out in our uncertainty. We're called to cry out. How long? It doesn't mean that we're second guessing God. It doesn't mean that we're questioning his sovereignty. It doesn't mean that we get to come and accuse God because of every circumstance that we find ourselves in. It's not about questioning God's decision, but it's about crying out before him in our distress. It's a longing for and a desire for the personal care of the Lord to be made known to us. And this is what we see as we come to Psalm 13, as David again is writing this psalm. And again, he begins by saying, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? I think we can break this psalm down really into three parts. You have verses 1 and 2, which are all a series of questions. Then we're going to look at 3 and 4, which is kind of the turning point in some ways of the psalm, but it's not really a turning point. It's the understanding that David has in light of his questions. Here are the things that he still is asking of God. He's desiring that God answer him. And then he closes in 5 and 6 with affirming what he knows to be true about God. So that's how we're going to kind of break this down. And so when we begin looking at verses 1 through 2, we see a series of questions. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? And so the first verse is all questions about David's feeling distance from God in the light of his situation. And we don't know, or at least I don't know. Maybe it's out there. Someone knows. I don't know exactly the situation that David is in here. Sometimes we get the psalm marker that says Psalm of David when such and such was happening. We don't specifically have that here. But obviously, David is feeling distant from God. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? There is a distance between David and what he feels like his relationship with God is. In verse 2, the questions turn but from David's connection with God to David's connection with his enemies around him. How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day long? How long shall my enemies be exalted over me? This is David crying out and saying, I feel isolated. I feel alone. I feel like I have no counsel in my soul and that my enemies are exalted over me. I think this is something that we as Christians can identify with. Now, certainly, and there's always the easy application right now to take this to our current situation, right? There are times right now where I'm crying out on a daily basis, how long, O Lord? How long will this go on? How long will I continue to feel isolated from my church family? How long will I feel distant from the world around me? How long, O Lord, will we be sheltered in our homes, fearful of what's going on around us? How long? Certainly, it's not the only time in our lives that we'll have the ability to cry out that. You can imagine someone who's going through a long illness. How long, O Lord? How long will I endure this pain? How long will I endure this suffering? You can imagine someone under the persecution of unbelievers. How long, O Lord, will it seem as if my enemies are being exalted over me? This question of how long is a good and proper question. It's one that we should be turning to and asking God in the midst of any trial and any situation. How long? How long? But here's the thing, though David feels distant from God, though he feels that God has hid his face from him, David doesn't turn to despair and believe that there is therefore no God. We see this immediately in verse 3. Consider and answer me, O Lord, my God. He is still resting firm in the reality that the Lord is his God, that he is real and that he is really there. And he's saying, consider me, answer me. And then David, in much the same way Moses does with Israel, appeals to the promises of God. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. David understands that he was the anointed king of God. And he, in much of that, referencing Moses, when Israel sinned and God was done with Israel, Moses appealed to him and said, what will the nations say? You promised certain things to them, and he basically says to him, what will you look like in the eyes of the nation if you do not keep your promises to these people? And of course, God had every right to. They had neglected the covenant. They had broken the covenant. But that's what Moses appeals to in much the same way. He says, consider me, answer me, O God. And he says two things, lest light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. There is this contrast between the life that comes from Christ, comes from God, I should say, versus the death that is apart from him. And then he appeals to his enemies, that they will say, I have prevailed over God's anointed one, in essence. And so he appeals to God, don't no longer hide your face from me. Lest my eyes be closed in death, lest my enemies say they have victory over me. And this is also something that we can rightly do. We can come and seek to see the glory of God above all else, to see him exalted even in our own lives, that we should come to him. We cry out, how long? And yet we can also say, hey, Lord, consider me, answer me, lest I be in despair and my soul be empty. Lest the world think it's right and have victory. Then David, turns in verse 5. Because even as he cries out, how long, even as he appeals to these things in 3 and 4, he is rooted firm in the steadfast love of the Lord. Verse 5, but I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. David is saying here that he has trusted in the Lord's, in Yahweh's Hesed. It's the Hebrew word Hesed, and it means so much. It's covenant loyalty, covenant faithfulness. I have trusted in the promises and the covenant love of God, and my heart shall rejoice in your salvation. There is a certainty that David prays this prayer, this psalm, that I know I will have victory because you are a covenant-keeping, covenant-making, faithful God. And my heart will rejoice in your salvation, or it says shall rejoice. There is a certainty in the rejoicing. So that we can look at the situation we're in now and we can say, my heart shall rejoice in the Lord, because he will deliver us. And again, this is not some sort of hokey pokey magical assurance, nor do I claim to be God and know how God will deliver us. Because here's what I know, right here, right now, that if I walk out or I close this video up and I open up the news and it says coronavirus is gone, then that tells me that the Lord has delivered us. In the same turn, if I close out this video and I find out I have coronavirus and I die from it, then I know that I have victory because I am in the presence of the Lord. Victory doesn't always look like we want it to, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have victory. We must trust in the covenant, faithful love of God, because he has brought to us salvation. And then finally, we close in verse 6 with the only way that we can respond to that, and that is worship. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. We should, even in our despair, even in our questioning, oh Lord, how long? We should sing to the Lord, because we know that he has dealt bountifully with us. He has dealt bountifully with us through the blood of his Son, Jesus Christ. He has loved us. He has sought us. He has been covenantally faithful to us. And so we cry out. We should cry out. But we cry out with the knowledge and understanding of who God is and what he has done. That he is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. That simply because our life circumstances, whatever's going on in our life, changes, doesn't mean God has changed. It doesn't mean he's less in control. Now, hear me. I know in many ways that's easy for me to sit here, to look in that camera and say to you. It's much harder to apply that to our hearts. But we need to be reminded again and again who God is. And do we believe he is who he says he is? And if so, are we living faithfully according to that belief? giving all praise and glory and honor to him. Brothers and sisters, I hope that in your despair and distress, in your alienation, your feeling of alienation at times from God, you can learn to cry out. But as you cry out, remember who he is and what he's done. We'll be back. Since today's Thursday, we won't have another video tomorrow. I'll be working on my worship service for this weekend tomorrow, but we'll be back next week continuing in the Psalms. Probably do another 3 or 4 Psalms before we move somewhere else. Hope this is helpful for you. Again, click the button up here so you can subscribe to the channel, like the video if you like it. You can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it if you want to share it with anybody. Look forward to seeing you this Sunday for worship, and I love you and praying for you.